Thank you and good morning. Several months ago, I was talking to several of my colleagues regarding privatization initiatives that were coming through the city, either for service or for other initiatives that were coming through. And there was a concern that deals were being pushed through the city of Chicago without proper vetting, without proper understanding of the ramifications of certain privatization initiatives. So along with some of my colleagues and some of the other organizations, we crafted an ordinance that stated simply that before any privatization deals would go forward, that we should have a hearing about them, open and honestly, that states all the pros and cons of a service or an asset being privatized before the actual initiative would take place. We thought it was a simple, sensible idea that everybody would get around. But here we are 7 months later, and we still cannot get this initiative out of the Rules Committee. I think that's wrong. I would urge the Rules Committee and the administration of the City of Chicago to please consider this initiative. All the Privatization, Accountability, and Transparency Ordinance states is that whenever an asset or a service is to be privatized, we need to know all the ins and outs of that deal before it happens. That means if there's going to be cost savings, which could be good. Are jobs going to be eliminated or saved? What actual cost savings there is? Would it result in a lack of or decrease in service? These initiatives need to be known before we make decisions on these types of initiatives. We have one big coming up down the pike right now, as everyone knows. Midway could be $2, maybe even $3 billion, which could be a good thing, but we don't know. Although I appreciate the mayor's initiative in having a committee that's going through the same things that we're talking about doing in the ordinance. All we want to do is have it codified. So not just for one initiative, all initiatives that come through the city as it relates to privatization, shown to be demonstrably able to save money, improve service, and protect middle-class jobs. Once we do that, a privatization deal may be approved. But until we have it codified in the city council where we can have honest and open dialogue about this, I think that we will continue to be stuck in not knowing and always having the deal like the sword of Damocles hanging over your head. So I'd urge my colleagues, and I thank my colleagues for standing here with me today, and I urge the rest of my colleagues to please consider helping moving this thing forward. It's a common sense initiative. It's not overly complicated, but it will result in improving the lives of all the citizens of the city of Chicago. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. This ordinance is so reasonable and so strong, it probably would have prevented the single biggest privatization abomination in Chicago history, the parking meter deal that we're still suffering from today. A majority of the City Council supports this ordinance. It is reprehensible for the Rules Committee to bottle it up for 7 months. Call it up, Mayor Emanuel, call it up, Alderman Mell, let's have a hearing. If you have a problem with it, if it needs tweaks, if it needs some changes, make them. But Mayor Emanuel has touted his commitment to transparency and accountability. This flies in the face of that commitment. He should be using his considerable influence over the City Council to get this out of the Rules Committee and in front of the entire Council. The City Council represents the nearly 3 million people in the city of Chicago who need and deserve protection from another privatization abomination like the parking meter deal. This ordinance takes care of business. This ordinance would have prevented that abomination by requiring a public hearing, a cost-benefit analysis, and most importantly, enough time to think through the pros and cons. That's the key. The parking meter deal was rammed through in the virtual dark of night to plug a major hole in the last mayor's budget. We didn't know the consequences. We didn't know the pros and cons. There wasn't due deliberation. We can't afford to let that happen again. This ordinance is designed to protect the people of Chicago from another privatization abomination. It's time for the Rules Committee to get it out in front of the entire council. It's time for the mayor to use his considerable influence over the council to demand that there be a hearing. And look, if it's got flaws, if it needs changes, that's why you have public hearings. We're not demanding it be passed in exactly the form it's presented in, although that's good. Let's have a hearing, do deliberation, let's take action now.
My name is Bob Reiter, and I am Secretary-Treasurer of the Chicago Federation of Labor. On behalf of President Jorge Ramirez, I'm here this morning to voice our support for this ordinance that will create well-deserved and long overdue transparency and accountability into city privatization plans. The Chicago Federation of Labor represents more than 320 local unions comprised of 500,000 members in the Chicago area. As an organization that represents both public and private sector unions, our problem is not with privatization per se. Our problem is when privatization hurts families and communities by replacing well-paying jobs with low-wage jobs, lacks collaboration from the workforce and its union representatives, and sets our communities back rather than moving them forward. We have witnessed far too many rushes to privatization, whether high-profile cases like the parking meters or lesser-known cases like airport runway broom refurbishing. And when well-paying jobs held by Chicago residents are replaced with lower-paying ones or outsourced to suburban contractors, the result is a net loss for the city. A number of cities around the country, such as Phoenix, Indianapolis, and San Diego, have created successful models for instituting fair competition, developing a strategy to identify the real cost of providing a service, establishing mechanisms for fair competition between the private sector and government employees, and proper oversight and transparency, there's that word again, can prove to be a win-win for workers, managers, and taxpayers. There is no reason why the city of Chicago cannot be a leader in collaboration and transparency when it comes to competition. In our 2011 Budget Efficiency Report, the Coalition of Unionized Public Employees welcomes such competition that protects taxpayers and workers through partnership, collaboration, innovation, and accountability. That's why it's important that we are here today with representatives from organized labor, from good government groups like the BGA, and from members of the City Council who are fighting for good public policy and good jobs. We are asking the City Council Rules Committee for a hearing on this ordinance that will protect workers and city taxpayers, and oftentimes they're the same people. We believe this can be a win-win situation for all Chicagoans, but not as long as it remains stranded in committee. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brendan Reilly, Alderman of downtown Chicago's 42nd Ward. I'm here also in support of this ordinance and to call for a hearing in the Rules Committee. As been mentioned by previous speakers, this has been bottled up in that committee for 7 months. And frankly, it's a concept that's been discussed for several years. Many of us have been struggling over the past 6 weeks to try and find a way to make some good out of a horrendous parking meter deal. And I can tell you, if we had a framework similar to the one suggested in this ordinance, when we were considering that deal back in 2008, I'm fairly certain it would not have been approved. I think this is responsible legislation. I think the taxpayers of Chicago deserve a framework that they can rely upon to know that as a city council, this body is doing its homework and frankly vetting these issues publicly in the light of day. And so for that, I commend the chief sponsor, Alderman SAWYER, and the Better Government Association, Organized Labor for supporting this. But most importantly, we need to have an open debate on this ordinance. And as was mentioned by previous speakers, if there are concerns about certain provisions of this ordinance, tweaks can be made, revisions can be introduced. But none of that conversation can begin until this is allowed a hearing and a vote by the Rules Committee. So I'm here today to respectfully request that the administration and my colleague, Chairman Mell, allow this to be debated so that we can take a look at potentially making those tweaks that people may wish to suggest. But in total, I think this is a responsible ordinance that does a lot to protect Chicago taxpayers from ever stumbling into a really bad deal like the one we're still recovering from in the parking meter deal. Thank you.
We're going to open up.
We can open it up for questions if there are any questions of any of the speakers. You can also do one-on-ones. Are there questions? Does anybody else want to say anything? Okay. Alderman Smith.
For being late. Hi, I'm Alderman Michelle Smith for the 43rd Ward. I want to again also express my support to Alderman Sawyer and the other co-sponsors of this ordinance. It is a time of change in our city council. It is a time when a very large percentage of the aldermen in city council want to participate and to advocate for open and transparent government. And the way to do that is to have full debate in city council on this measure and and many other worthy measures, such as our request for an independent budget office, so that the taxpayers and city council can have the information that we need in order to responsibly pass privatization measures, leases, and indeed our own city budget. And I'd like to congratulate Alderman Sawyer, the Better Government Association, and my fellow aldermen on working together to get this bill out of committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. Okay, go.
Done? Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman.